Hey guys, welcome to a little bit different video. Henning isn't with us today, but we have someone else filling in for him, so it'll be me and Emily.
Hello guys, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Emily. I used to be a former games artist at Media Molecule in the UK, and now I am a recent addition to the Flip Normals team. And I'm excited to join Morten today, where we're going to talk a bit about, I guess, the power of creating in film and TV.
Yeah, so before we get into it, make sure to subscribe. So we, like I guess many others, recently watched the new Witcher show on Netflix, and I was actually very skeptical in the beginning. Well, before the show came out, because I was a big fan of the games. I never read the books, but I played the games quite a lot. So, and when I saw Henry Cavill was gonna play Geralt, I was like, well, that's probably not gonna go too well.
I think we all thought that.
But I think his emotional range fits perfectly with Geralt. Like his lines are pretty much restricted to yeah, exactly. And shut up, Jaskier, stuff like that. But no, I was pleasantly surprised with the show. So we thought we'd do a video covering sort of like not the basics of grading, but how grading can improve your footage. It's something we've talked about in the past as well when it comes to your final pieces. Just throw them into Photoshop or when you have a compositor, maybe in Blender or in Nuke or something like that. Just throw it in there and adjust the contrast a little bit and play around with the color balance, because it can actually make quite a big difference. So we've selected out 6 scenes from The Witcher here. I would suggest that you go watch the show. There might be that little bit of spoilers in this. I'm not
Very
sure.
little.
Very little.
Yeah.
But we'll talk a little bit about the scenes and sort of like the mood that you can evoke with different kinds of grading.
I also think what you're going to see today is just how powerful grading is in terms of helping you tell the story and enhance the focal point. It can really change the whole scene and help the crew tell the story that they need to tell.
So in this first scene, this is Geralt in a desert. And, typically, like if you've watched like a good film that comes to mind is like Sicario, where like it's very Mexico and desert based, and you always have that switch between Mexico and like the US, where if there's like a US scene, it's kind of blue and cool colors, and if it's in Mexico, then it turns very, very yellow. So that's kind of like the same feel here. It's always the case when they're like you have a desert shot or something like that. They tend to grade it quite yellow to get that warm feeling across. So the first thing here is saturation and reds in the skin color. So just a heads up, this is a before picture that I've graded the original, which is down here. It's called
It's
after.
like an educated guess to how the raw footage would look like.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to get raw footage like that. Well, impossible, actually.
Yeah.
So I've sort of like degraded it back to a sort of
Degraded it.
a neutral state, if you will. So the first thing, you get your footage. And for this example here, we're putting some oranges and some reds back into the skin color, just to give them a little bit of life, and couple that with overall saturation in the image. Then a good combination of colors here. So these are just hue and saturations, and these two here are color balances in Photoshop. So you have different grading nodes in different software, but this is the closest estimate that I could give you. Here we introduce some greens and some blues. This is mostly for the shadows, so you can see how much this affects the background, right? It has a pretty big impact on it. Couple that with yellows, the classic color balance thing that we just talked about with yellows on a desert, and you get this kind of a
There
feel.
you go.
So you
Now
get
we're
this
in the desert.
slight green here in the background because of the green overlay that's in the shadows. So it's a little bit of a mix of green and blues, because that looks nice in shadows, and then boosting the yellows in everything that sort of receives light, whether it's Geralt's face or whether it's the background. Now the big one here, which we'll just cover briefly, it's called a logarithmic conversion. So the logarithmic conversion is something that you do to footage. Well, it's footage that you shoot typically for film or TV shows. So just to give you an idea of what it actually does, it does this to your contrast.
It's crazy difference.
This We have eye saturation. So you see just boosting the eye saturation a little bit and introducing a little bit of vignette. But I just want to quickly cover this logarithmic conversion, because this here is my best estimate to how the footage looked before it was graded, with all these things on top. So we get to this, the logarithmic conversion, and usually films and TV shows will be shot in a log format, just because it gives you more control over the contrast. Basically, what it does is that you don't allow anything to be shot in complete black or complete white. So in order to sort of guess what this logarithmic footage actually looked like before it was converted, I've just taken A levels and just cranked, or
removed the blacks.
Yeah, remove the blacks and remove the complete whites from the footage. So like if you were to go over with like a color picker or something like that, you'll be able to see that even something that looks completely black isn't actually black, and something that looks very close to white isn't actually white. It's logarithmic footage like this differs. There are plenty of technical explanations out there for what it is, how to work with it, but just know that this is something that happens, and it just gives you greater control when it comes to grading. So just as a before and after, I just want to show you. This is the estimate of the raw footage on set, and this is the actual screen grab from the desert scene. So
it's
quite a big
amazing
difference.
to see how washed out the before is,
Yeah.
how purple it is as well.
Yeah.
But that is actually, when you see pictures of yourself from outside, that is what your skin looks like. Nice and pink and purple. Nothing like the desert after grading.
So it's quite a dramatic difference, actually. So we have more to go through here. We have the onion scene, which is started the show, I think. Here, this is to sort of highlight the difference compared to the last scene. This has a lot of CG in it, so all of this is going to be CG, like everything in the background. The road here, Geralt and Jaskier, and Roach, of course, like they aren't CG. There's stuff done to them, and the road would be fine. Maybe some of the plants back here maybe are, but everything here is probably CG. So this has this like very washed out feel. Like we talked about it just before, that when you do this and you shoot it in log, it looks very just washed out like anything else. But because there's CG in here that you have to sort of like pre-match, it makes it look even more washed out.
Yeah, and it actually makes the CG stand out quite a lot, and not in a good way. Like when you look at those towers there in the background, they stand out as sort of like blurry, not integrated, yet there's just something about the before grading that just makes it very apparent that the background is fake.
So first thing is we'll just introduce some cyan color into the mountains here and a little bit into the sky. Again, an overall saturation pass it's fantasy, so most of the time they boost a lot of the greens to make it look more fantastical. Couple that with a little bit of a green-blue overlay, and then the classic yellow desert overlay. Again, they're heading towards the desert in the scene, and we have a road in here, so just to give it a little bit of warmth and a little bit of yellow light. And then the log conversion makes it look like this. And I think
looks like it's so weird because it looks overdone. Like once you've adjusted your eye to that before one and see the log conversion, it seems like they almost overgraded it.
Yeah.
Like all of the details in the characters midsection all disappears, but it's very effective for cinema, and you know exactly where to look. And it's also created a lot of depth in the picture, actually, because you have that warmth in the foreground, the blues in the background by the mountains. So you just know instantly where they want you to look.
Yeah, it's like the depth that Emilia is talking about, especially like you look here at the shadow being cast here in the tower, and especially on the characters, right? There's a lot of depth being created with this contrast in the log conversion. Not everything comes from this log conversion. I've sort of like put everything into the log conversion, but the log conversion, it's not just that. There's also a contrast that's being adjusted, but I've sort of just like coupled them into this thing that I call the log conversion.
I think it's very interesting also how it makes the CG elements, especially the towers, sit much nicer in the picture after the log conversion has been done. I think it's down to just the characters having so much contrast that my attention is being drawn to them. I no longer, like, the towers play a very big part in the image without all the grading on top. So it somehow makes it blend in much nicer. And we no longer think about the fact that it's like plonked in on top.
Yeah. And then we have the servitude scene. So this is a shower scene with, well, someone from the show and Geralt. So this is gonna be I think you'll be surprised by the end result. I guess maybe you can kind of you get an idea of it down here, but you'll really be surprised when you see it like big blown up like this. So two major things in this scene is, again, it's the popular grading method that you see on all like blockbuster posters.
Classic orange and teal.
Yeah, the orange and teal.
Seriously, Google action movie posters and you're gonna see it everywhere.
Especially with like Michael Bay films.
Yes.
That's like
He
Transformers.
loves it.
So the first thing here is we'll introduce some oranges, general oranges in the scene. Well, not oranges, but orange hues and tones like that. And then teal. So the teal area is mainly going to be this window area where the light shines through. And this right now actually looks pretty natural. But for a fantasy environment or a Michael Bay film, you don't want that. You want this. So this is the original, right? Keep that in mind. I'm just adding it back in. I've removed it with these. It's sort of like these are reversely grading everything. So if we go into the cyans, you can see I've pulled down the saturation, as well as the blues a little bit. So that's all it does. So it reintroduces the teals back into it.
It looks incredibly exaggerated when you put it back on. Like, that teal is like just combined with the rest of the image right now. It's almost hurting your eyes. But like, it's nice. It's really nice though for the image and the composition right in the middle. But it is a lot.
Yeah, it's crazy how much, especially like you can see the little preview window over here. When you look at it as just for composition purposes, you can see how nicely it just frames the two characters right in the center there. And then because we're inside, it's a bathing room. There's candle lights. We want to do the desert trick where we introduce a lot of yellow into the scene.
Coziness.
Yeah, give it warmth. And then finally, we have the log conversion. Kills everything.
It's just wild. Yeah, everything just goes out of, but it makes it very intimate.
Yeah.
You know, it seems like they're sitting in a little romantic cave almost. So it's very effective for the story that they're trying to tell. It makes sense. It's just incredible to see how much of the detail you actually lose once you put that final layer on there.
Yeah, it's not a subtle thing, right?
Not at all. But also this almost makes it seem a little bit like awkward. This lighting, when you take it off, is like there is so much light around them that it's like they're in this big open space.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel a little bit like you're alone standing naked in front of a camera crew. So
it's like this is supposed to, like, on the right hand side, you know, that's supposed to convey intimacy and, you know, emotional conversation, something, you know, you can trust each other. This is like,
locker room.
Yeah, you're in a locker room, in like a Russian locker room where you're about to go into the sauna or something, and everyone is just like naked, and it's just
practical purposes.
Exactly. Not nice. One thing I quickly wanted to cover actually was this vignette down here. So it's very subtle because the vignetting, as in most films, unlike when most people an artist make vignettes, it's quite subtle, and that's what you want it to be. So just to explain how this works quickly, this is a just a white layer with a little bit of black painted where I'm assuming the vignette is going to be. Set it to divide, and then, you know, that just subtracts the black vignette from what's black in the footage and gives you an estimate for how it would look like without a vignette. So there we go, before and after. Then we have the Blaviken scene.
This one is interesting because it looks done. Like, you look at this image right here and you're like, that looks great. What would you want to do? You know, it seems like it's ready to go in the episode to me.
And you're about to find out.
I'm about to find out.
So to give you some background on this one, this is the, you know, Butcher of Blaviken scene where Geralt gets that name, and he, you know, he kills people, not in a nice way. So you want this scene to feel uncomfortable.
Sick,
Yeah, it's like sickly, right? So the first thing we want to do here is introduce some greens and some blues into the shadows, into his clothing, and to give it that a little bit of a cold feel. Pump up the saturation like we do with most shots, and then really emphasize that it's cold. This is
It's like dead.
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's based on a Polish book. It's a
It
Polish
does look
author.
very Polish
It's
right
like
now.
you want it to feel like
Yeah.
Eastern Europe. It's cold and it's in the middle of, I don't know,
It's all gray.
autumn or
Yeah.
winter. And then you combine those two again with the yellow desert trick that we had before, and you get this, depending on the ratio of blue to green to yellow, you can either make it feel very nice by pumping up the yellow and have it be nice and warm, or you can make it feel more sick, have this green tint to everything now.
And like that's very interesting because when you look at that as an image, that to me is a less pretty image than what we started with. But that's not the point here. The point is actually not to make the image the prettiest it can be.
Yeah.
It is to make it convey the right feeling. I know personally I always subtract green from my renders because it makes it look sickly and I want it to be appealing. But in this particular case, you can use that to your advantage. Make it more green, make it more sick, make it tell the story that you want to tell.
And also, this is just a guess. I don't actually know, but it looks like to me that The Witcher was shot with anamorphic lenses, because you kind of get this. If you pay close attention to the outside of the image, you can kind of see this ring of distortion around everything. That's typical with some sort of like anamorphic lenses. And the cool thing is that I can get this effect of really zoning in on the character, because not only is the background getting blurred, it's also getting, stretched a little bit. It's just a cool effect. And then we have the log conversion, which is crazy in this scene.
Boom.
Very dark.
His eyes just disappear.
Yeah.
But it makes him look evil.
But
so
it's
works.
good,
Yeah.
because like previously, like with Geralt, his eyes they've been very bright, very yellow, and very human most of the time. I would say in the show. But here he kind of loses that humanity by really darkening down the eyes, and he just goes cold and starts killing people.
I think this is such an excellent example, since the image to begin with looked great already.
Yeah.
That in your own personal pieces, when you do a render and you think to yourself, this is great, like I don't need anything else on this, try and take it into Photoshop anyways and apply some filters, and you'll be so amazed to see how much you can still enhance your image. It's just so hard to see once you have that before. You need to apply it and do the comparison in order to see where you can improve your renders. So even though your render might look perfect, do it anyway and see what you can get from it. I think this is a great example of that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be much, like we mentioned in the beginning. It just be a little bit of a contrast and play around with brightness and the shadows, and then maybe add a little bit of saturation, play around with color balance as well, just to see what you can actually get out of it. Because a little bit goes a long way.
Yeah, definitely.
Obviously here it's
a long way.
It's a long way, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of grading here. So, but that's what happens in a professional environment.
But it does make it look cinematic as well. That's like there's something about when you see these cheap TV shows that they're not graded enough, and it just makes it look like home video a little bit. So there's something about that overgrading it that gives it that like cinematic cool look. It makes it like it draws us in. It's a fantasy story, so it works. It really does.
It's also I think important to point out the difference between, let's say you're recording or shooting something film with a log, color space, or if you're shooting something on your phone, right? So your phone doesn't shoot in log, it just shoots what it sees. So things shot in log, if they're not edited or not graded afterwards, it looks even cheaper than something shot on your phone. But obviously, if you shoot in log, I'm assuming you know what you're doing. So
hopefully,
this is an example of something that's been less graded, because I think it's a little more. Well, it's not overcast, because obviously there's pretty harsh shadows, but there's a lot of fog in the distance.
A lot of atmosphere here.
A lot of atmosphere, yeah. So you don't need as much darkness in the contrast, because that would just make the picture look kind of strange. So this is a very subtle example of what grading can look like as well. So you might not actually be able to see much of what happens with the first three, but I'll attempt to show it anyway. We introduce a little bit of yellows into the picture, combine that with the green and blues to pump up the greens in the forest and see if we can increase the blues in the the shadows in the mountains. Again, the yellow desert thing that we throw on top of everything in this show makes it get that yellow green feel. And then finally the log conversion that just grounds it like everything we've looked at before. It just just brings the shadows a little closer together and further away from the highlights.
Yeah, it enhances the focal point basically. You know where to look.
Yeah, and you can see that especially like if you look here and if you look at the keep, the log conversion really does a lot to ground it, I think. There, before and after. As you can see, this is a pretty subtle change compared to this, I would say. And now for the final one, which is there's quite a big change in this one, I would say. This is a cool one.
It's a really great picture already. Like, this is a beautiful shot.
Yeah,
I would say.
and I think this one especially just shows how well the show was lit. On set. Like, it's just the set by itself is actually really well done, and the lighting is really well done. So the better your base lighting is, the better it's going to be for your grade.
Yeah, you'll have more control to play with. The same goes for you guys' personal work. Try and adopt the same strategy that people use on film, in the sense that you don't want to paint with complete blacks and complete whites, because you're just robbing yourself of that control later down the line to balance out your values and balance out your colors.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to learn from this that you can apply in your personal pieces.
Yeah, and I think that was one thing that I started doing many years ago with rendering, actually, was I stopped using completely black materials and completely white materials, because first of all, nothing really is in the real world, and it's just a small trick that can help you just achieve a little bit more realism, especially if you're rendering. But also, like Emilia's pointing out, if you're whatever pieces you're doing, if you're painting something or making a character, you never want to go to complete black or complete white, no matter what.
There's just something about it. It stands out so violently
Yeah.
that and not in a good way. And you'll see it in a lot of portfolios where people are just starting out with painting. They have a tendency to do, a 100% white highlights, 100% black shadows, and it just makes the image scream a little bit, but not in the right way. So try and avoid that, so you have more control later on. You'll get a more balanced image.
Right, so the orgy scene. Orgy scene. I was just reading it, my brain was just going like, first of all, the oranges, this is again back to the skin tones from the very first image with Geralt in the desert. So this is primarily for skin tones.
This is lovely though, because this is a sensual scene, and it really gives her that warmth and the red lips that you would want to see in an orgy scene like this.
Classic orgy scenes.
Classic orgy scene.
And then back to, it's the same thing as the servitude scene. I've just made these names up, by the way. There's not official names for the scenes or anything. We have the teal from the window here. You can see how nicely this shot is actually set up. It's completely symmetrical, and she's perfectly framed within the windowsill, right? So by increasing that blue, it's like you're increasing the contrast without... You're increasing the contrast through color without actually increasing it through intensity or light or darkness.
Also, something Morten just mentioned about the symmetry in this shot. It's very well thought out, because she's in complete control in this scene, and that shows like the room is completely symmetrical behind her. She knows exactly what she's doing. She has everyone where she wants them to be. So that just conveys her place of power very well, this composition they set up here.
Yeah, it's like it's everything from the cuts on these, I don't know what these are called, decorations.
No idea.
The pillars, equal amounts of pillars, and her clothing, everything is symmetrical.
Yeah.
Right? So, and then, but the cool thing is, especially in a shot like this, if we sort of stray away from just looking at color, talking more about composition, you can see that in this shot, I mean, she could be in even more control and be very stiff by looking straight into the camera and perfectly forward, but instead she's got her head, tilted that way, and that kind of gives you
inviting. You can approach her.
There's
She's
a sense
not
of
gonna
play.
chop your head off.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
So Continuing with the color stuff, we have again yellows and warmth. This time I called it warmth instead of desert because we're inside, but it's essentially the same thing. We have candles everywhere, and it just gives the room a sense of warmth. Essentially, that's what we're trying to achieve here, and it's a lot of warmth, especially when you look at this.
Yeah, it's a lot of candles apparently.
Like when I do this, just these two things together, it feels like a nice image. This has a more realistic feel to it. Like this is what you would expect probably. Then you add this on top because it's cinematic and it's
fantasy,
it's fantasy. So you get it. You just take it to the extreme essentially. And then finally we have the log conversion again, which just
That's crazy.
kills all
That's
the
just
detail.
crazy. Like the first time you switch that on, you think that can't be right. This is not what it looked like in the show. This is way too extreme. But then once you get used to it, and especially when you see this before after, the before looks like, I don't even know how to describe it anymore, because this is such an efficient image. Like look at how all of the focus is just drawn onto her. All that background is pushed away, and you're just looking at her and her face and her lips. It's very efficient, but my God, it looks overdone at first.
We don't really sense the symmetry as much.
No.
The way we sense symmetry now is obviously by her being in the center of the room, and then maybe a little bit of reflected light off of the pillars here. That's about it, right? We can see how much detail. It's like, it's not detail that we lose. We forego the detail for another purpose, and it's compositional and it's storytelling. So it's pretty powerful what you can do with grading in comp.
Very powerful. I think it also just allows you to decide after,
Yeah.
like what mood do you want and where do you want your focal point to be, because they have all that like data in the image. They don't necessarily need to make like a call and it needs to be this extreme lighting on set. You can do that later, balance it out with the shots that come before and after it, so that it just frees them up, I think, to sort of like set the tone later on, see what works. Yeah, it's very cool.
Yeah. So I think that just about does it for this video. This was a different video. Obviously, we have Emily here instead of Henning. And yeah, if you want to see more videos like this in the future, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment down below. And we'll see you in the next one.
See you in the next one.